Well, Minnesota Vikings quarterback Kirk Cousins is hoping 2021 is a little less streaky than 2020 was. Cousins all over the passing map last season. He was 8th in yards passing, 6th in touchdowns thrown, and then 3rd in interceptions thrown, and 18th in QBR. He recently appeared on All Things Covered with Brian McFadden and his new teammate Patrick Peterson, looking ahead to the season. A rough start to the season for the Vikings last term. 1-5 eventually led to a 7-9 finish. The team had 2 3-game losing streaks, just 1 3-game win streak. All 3 of those wins in that streak were against each of their division rivals. Only 4 teams in the conference scored more points than they did, but only Detroit had more points scored against them in the NFC. And for more on the Vikings as they look towards 2021 and more importantly, the NFL draft, we now welcome in former quarterback Danny Kanell and the man whose mock drafts are universally and equally loved and hated, CBS Sports HQ NFL analyst Ryan Wilson. Danny, let's start with Kirk Cousins here and his struggles in 2020. Lots has been made about what he's paid and the return on the investment that the Vikings are getting. How much pressure is on him and subsequently the Vikings as they enter 2021?
A ton. I mean, Kirk Cousins, I think, is one of the most disrespected quarterbacks in the NFL. But at the same time, I think even Kirk Cousins would tell you himself that he's got to pick up his level of play. He has to pick up, the slack around him. When you're paid as much as he is, you are paid to elevate the team around you. And that, unfortunately, is something where because there were issues on the offensive line, because they had lost Stephon Diggs, you saw some of his limitations come to light, where they need to bolster the play of those around him. They need to put a better squad around him. If you do that, he can be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. If you don't, that's when he looks more pedestrian. So I think some of this is on the Vikings front office, which also is why we're here talking about the draft. I think it's important that they get him the right pieces in the draft and through free agency to put him in the best position to succeed. If you do that, there's no doubt he's a quarterback that can take your team to the Super Bowl. He's just not the type of quarterback that's going to, all right, get on my back, I'll carry you, a la Aaron Rodgers, what he's done for the Packers his entire career.
Yeah, Danny's exactly right. We see a lot of disrespect when it comes to Kirk Cousins. By the way, this is bad news for Mac Jones because Mac Jones is a Kirk Cousins type player, where he's going to have the same expectations that Kirk's been facing in Minnesota. But I'll say this. Here's the thing about Kirk Cousins. As we sit here, he is currently number 2 among active quarterbacks in the NFL in completion percentage at 67%, behind only Deshaun Watson. That means he's ahead of Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, and the list goes on and on. So he is doing something right. It may not be the excitement we see from Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray or Russ Wilson, but for the most part, he's making things happen. Danny mentioned they lost Steph Diggs to Buffalo. They replaced him with Justin Jefferson. They have Adam Thielen. They have Irv Smith at tight end. They have Dalvin Cook in the backfield. But they do need to bolster the offensive line. And perhaps more importantly, and Mike Zimmer would probably tell you this, the defense has to play better. They had a lot of young faces on defense last year, and they were overpowered and outmanned, it felt like, on a weekly basis. They have to get that sorted out. That'll make things a little easier for Kirk Cousins, especially if he can protect him along the offensive line and get back to doing and having the success we saw prior to that 7-9 season last year.
As you mentioned, the pieces are there around him with Dalvin Cook, Thielen, Justin Jefferson. The Vikings made a number of additions to their defense, and rightfully so. We mentioned quarterback Patrick Peterson, who joined the team. He's joined by Xavier Woods, comes in from Dallas. Nick Vigil, the linebacker from the Chargers. Edge rusher Stephen Weatherly from Carolina. Ryan, what are your thoughts on how the Vikings have done in free agency so far?
They've done okay. I mean, you talked about the needs they got mostly on the defensive side of the ball, and that's certainly understandable. They'll have Michael Pierce coming back, the defensive tackle they signed last offseason, who opted out because of the pandemic. So that's a huge get in the middle of the defense. But again, the young players have to continue to step up. The Cameron Dancers of the world, the Jeff Gladneys of the world, their draft picks last year in that defensive-heavy draft class, they have to do a better job. I think Pat P., obviously, who hosts the All Things Covered podcast with BMAC, is going to be a huge get there. A big, strong, physical cornerback to help in the secondary, not only on the field, but in terms of leadership. But the young guys have to continue to develop. Mike Zimmer will demand that of them, and that will be integral to any success they have in 2021 in that incredibly difficult division that starts with the Packers there.
What Ryan, I think, is trying to say, it was kind of a meh. Like, it's all right. Like, it's not great. It doesn't blow you away. I'd say it's like a C+. Like, I don't think there's that splashy big home run hire. Patrick Peterson in his prime, one of the best corners in the league. I think he was way better than Richard Sherman, who I think compared against each other, some people might have said Richard Sherman was better. I do think Patrick Peterson needs to kind of have a resurgence. His numbers have curtailed somewhat. There's no way you're going to hear me talk bad about him, though, because that's B-Mac's guy. I played golf with him. I would love to see that resurgence happen, but he is getting older, and Father Time catches up to every player in the NFL eventually. But I would love to see him with some fresh legs, fresh environment, come in and contribute and be a meaningful impact player. You know, they're bolstering up some of the positions of need, but again, I don't think there was that splashy, blow you away signing that's just going to say, wow, it's going to take this team to the next level. So I'm still kind of waiting for that to happen. Maybe it happens in the draft. We'll see. They don't, you know, pick where they pick. It's not like they're going to get a top 10 pick. So I think they're kind of looking at it saying, all right, we're going to address some positions of need. We're not going to overspend, which is probably a smart thing to do.
Yeah, and Ryan Wilson's latest mock, a 7-rounder for all the fans out there. He's gone from 2 to 3 to 7. He has them taking edge rusher Kwity Paye, heading to the land of 10,000 lakes with the 14th overall pick. Danny, are you in agreement with that choice, or is there a bigger need for them in your mind when it comes to pick 14?
Well, I look at this, and I think Kwity Paye would be an exceptional addition to that defense. But I think their biggest need is offensive line, offensive line, offensive line. I mean, I think this team ideally would like to look kind of like the Titans do, except Dalvin Cook's not the same type of back. I mean, he's explosive. He's more explosive. But I do think he's one of the top running backs in the NFL. And I think Kirk Cousins would really benefit from that. But if you want to get Dalvin Cook going, and if you want to make Kirk Cousins comfortable in the pocket, Kirk Cousins isn't running away from anybody. He's not Ryan Tannehill either, who can, you know, run a lot of boots and stuff. So they have to have protection up front. So I would prioritize potentially the offensive line, but they might be able to address that later in the 3rd round with a couple of picks there. So it kind of depends on who's available. If they went to edge rusher, I think that's always a position. If you like somebody at 14, that's where you might find some value at that position. But I wouldn't hesitate to maybe address the offensive line issues too, especially considering what we were talking about at the top of the show. They've invested a lot of money in Kirk Cousins. You want to give him the best chance to succeed. They've got it at some of the skill positions, but they have to get that offensive line better up front.
Yeah, I'm actually right there with you, Danny. And I had Kwity Paye going 14 only because the offensive linemen in front of them were off the board. And we know that Penei Sewell and Rashawn Slater will be long gone. But even Elijah Vera Tucker, we can see Christian Darrisaw gone earlier. If the Cowboys decide to take an offensive lineman, if the Giants do, if certainly the Chargers do, who will be in that conversation, I'm with you. If there's someone there that they love that plays offensive line, by all means take him. If not, think about edge rush help because you do need to get better along the front 4 there. You have Danielle Hunter, who missed time last season with the injury, and if you don't have a pass rush, you don't have anything. Doesn't matter who's playing in the secondary. So those are the 2 primary needs for me. I also mentioned quarterback, and I say that in part because Pete Prisco's mock draft this week had them taking Trey Lance at 14, and it doesn't seem like one of these quarterbacks will fall down that far. They'll probably all be gone by 11 or 12. But every year something weird happens. And if there's a quarterback there at 14, Kirk Cousins has 2 years left on his deal, you got to think about it. I think at the very least you entertain trade offers if you're absolutely against it to get something in return. But if you love Trey Lance or Mac Jones or Justin Fields, I think you'd think about pulling the trigger on a quarterback at 14 too.
And we mentioned Kwity Paye, and your fellow mock drafters, Ryan, seem to agree with that the offensive line help's going to be gone in terms of the pick. So going with defense, except as you mentioned for Pete, who likes Trey Lance. What are the other options do you see for the Vikings at 14?
Yeah, so I sort of touched on it there with the offensive line and the edge rush class. Look, safety could be in the conversation. They need safety help. Anthony Harris ended up signing that 1-year deal with the Eagles because the Vikings didn't re-sign him. But I don't think you're taking a safety at 14. Again, if there's a quarterback there and you don't want him, trade down to the 20s. You can get a safety there, whether it's Trevon Moehrig or you go in another direction to help that team in the back end. Because as I mentioned, if you're not getting edge rush help to go along with Danielle Hunter in round 1, you're going to have to circle back and do that. This edge class isn't particularly deep, but you can go with other positional needs in round 1 if offensive line or edge rush isn't there at the middle of the round. But again, I am intrigued by the idea of quarterback, especially given the way that we've just talked about Kirk Cousins always seeming to be portrayed in a bad light. But also because the athleticism these quarterbacks are now playing with might be incredibly intriguing, which of course means that Mac Jones will fall to 14 and the Vikings will take him there just to replace Kirk Cousins.
Right. I look at it. So here we are so much on the same page. I got my offensive linemen. See, Penei Sewell and Rashawn Slater X'd out because I don't think they'll be available. And I had Elijah Vera Tucker. If he's available, to take him there to shore up. I think he'd be perfect for a guard position in the NFL. I think you could plug him in early, shore up the middle of that offensive line, so you could give Kirk Cousins some room to step up. He's athletic. I think you could shift him down from tackle. I think guard's probably where he's best suited at the next level. If he's not available, I did go along your line of thinking with the Kwity Paye, because I think around in the teens, in the early teens, is when you'll start to see some of these edge rushers after you see the run on quarterbacks and the run on wide receivers and the run on Kyle Pitts and some of those other skill positions. Then I think you see some edge rushers start to come off the board. And if you have a swing at him, I wouldn't hesitate to pick him at all. Add him on the other side of Danielle Hunter. Give another presence in there so you don't have so many double teams coming his way. And Kwity Paye, from the athleticism and talent he's shown, some of the numbers he's laid down, some of the potential that's there, he could be a fantastic addition to this Vikings defense.
Danny going old school with the notebook and the pen and like writing stuff out. Wow, okay. So Danny, let's...
Jeremy, it's erasable pen, which is so 2020.
Oh,
I
there
love
we
it.
go.
Erasable pen.
An erasable pen, okay. Hey, let's access the notebook then. Who should they be looking at on day 2 for you?
So this is something where I know Pete Prisco had him getting a quarterback. We talked about Trey Lance at 14. I don't think that'll be an option. So I was looking a little bit later in the draft. I think Kyle Trask from a skill set position could really potentially, as you know, you're not investing a lot in a later pick, maybe 3rd round, and you swing at it and say, maybe we can develop him, maybe he hits, maybe he doesn't, but he's similar type of player as Kirk Cousins. Davis Mills out of Stanford, only 1 year playing, but really has the skill set you're looking for. He's tall, he's athletic, he's showcased, he's flashed a little bit of arm talent there, so that could be another potential filler there. Then there are some edge rushers that might be available. Ronnie Perkins out of Oklahoma, when he came back to that defense in the latter portion of the season, about the last 8 games of the season this past year, they look completely different. A little bit more of a developmental project. And Peyton Turner, a defensive end coming out of Houston, might be an option later. And then if you wanted to address the guard position again, Wyatt Davis out of Ohio State could be somebody to fill a need there. But I would not stretch for the quarterback at 14. I don't think you're in a rush, because you know what you've got in Kirk Cousins. You've got stability there at the very least. If you want to take a flyer on somebody with a potential future, do it with a later round pick. I would not waste a 14th pick overall on a quarterback.
I love that list that Danny just had there. A lot of those names make a ton of sense for what the Vikings need, starting with the quarterback. Like Kyle Trask feels like Kirk Cousins, who just needs to grow into that role. I love what he did there. Here are 2 names that I had for day 2 possibilities. The Vikings don't have a 2nd round pick. They don't pick till 78. So I had him going to offensive line with Kendrick Green, interior offensive lineman to Illinois. I absolutely love the way he plays. He is an absolute spark plug in the middle of that O-line. He can play guard. He can kick inside the center, so he gives you some versatility there. And I talked about the safety position earlier. Andre Cisco out of Syracuse towards ACL early in the fall, but he has 1st-round skills. He can do some things really well. I think he had 13 total interceptions at Syracuse over the course of his career. Suffered the injuries I mentioned. He should be healthy and ready to go by the time the season starts. He could be a day 2 target who, again, can play deep center field. He can play in the slot. He can blitz off the edge. He does those sorts of things for a versatile Mike Zimmer defense that fits what they're trying to do over there in Minnesota.
11 draft picks for the Vikings in this upcoming draft, so they do have a lot of capital that they can spend. Danny Kanell, Ryan Wilson, stay put. We're going to talk more NFC North coming up. But first, let's take a look at the Vikings odds. Pre-draft odds from Vegas to win the Super Bowl, plus 4,000 to win the NFC, plus 2,000, and NFC North plus 150. They are minus 175 to win the playoffs, and the regular season win total sitting at 8.5.
Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.